know, everybody's having a good time. Also, if anybody, while we're doing this, if anybody has, questions, they always have in the back of their mind about, why does the library do things? Why do they have a dollhouse in the middle of the library? Or why do whatever? Feel free to ask them.
Yeah, we really hope that people will ask questions and participate. If you have your own stories, that would be wonderful to share.
Because so much of what the library is at the moment is the accumulated energies of the individuals who've been involved over the years. Having when the people that had ideas or had the skills to do something, then that got done. Something we didn't have a skill for, it didn't get done.
If somebody knew somebody who had an aunt who knew an architect, that was that kind of thing, especially with the new building.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And one thing which I don't think we've mentioned before is when we did move in here, Gretchen and Alan designed and donated all of our landscape to have people who had.
It's very old now.
Well, you told us it had a 7-year life expectancy, but after a certain amount of time it needed to be changed.
Yeah.
But still. And some of the things would have lasted longer, but we went and put a sidewalk around the side and a tree had to go. So I think we see this in a lot of ways as question and answer, but we'll talk about certain things.
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and start. We kind of envisioned this as a participatory event. So I hope that's how it goes. And we'll probably have people showing up late as we usually do. Anyway, we got the idea of doing this activity because at the volunteer program that we had the volunteer appreciation program we had last year, we did a trivia game. And the answers to the questions had to do with history of the library, with events that happened in the library in the past. And not very many people knew the answers. So, but Suzanne certainly did. And so people would ask questions and she began to answer and tell stories, many of which Melissa and Nancy and I knew about. So we decided it would be great to go ahead and have her hold forth in an informal event. Having said that, I did think it might be important to talk a little bit about some things that happened before Suzanne came on the scene back in the 1980s. So I went through and read some librarian reports, many of which were written in longhand, on yellowing paper with a fountain pen and hard to read in some cases, but beautiful handwriting. So I'm going to go ahead and read just some excerpts. And then Stephanie and Nancy are also going to read excerpts from some newspaper articles and some letters and some of the reports. They're very brief, but they each give a window into that particular period of time. This first paragraph I'm reading was written by Noni McBride. The Beck Memorial Library first opened its doors to the public on June 21st, 1952, with a collection of 800 books, a few pieces of furniture, and a librarian who was paid 75 cents an hour. Housed in 2 rooms behind Dr. Robert McBride's office at 14 Water Street, which is where the Water Street Tavern is currently located. That was where his office was. And the library was open 2 afternoons and 1 evening per week. The opening was the culmination of years of planning by Reverend Donald Stockford, the owner of McBride, Alice Castelli, and others who founded the Lubeck Memorial Library Association in 1946. Then, throughout the library's history, dedicated volunteers and generous benefactors have ensured that the citizens of Lubeck have had access to free, quality library service. When the association began its search for the library's location, it was Dr. McBride who suggested that 2 rooms behind his Water Street office might be available. The space was in serious need of paint, wiring, light fixtures, a new floor, heat, and other necessities. Undaunted, the group began raising funds, seeking donations of furniture, paint, and other materials, and through their own labor, created an inviting home for the new library. They had been collecting and storing books for several years, and donations increased once the library was open. Library use increased steadily during the 1950s as Lubec's population and prosperity grew along with the fortunes of the sardine industry. The library had outgrown its original home, and once again, a search for a larger quarters was undertaken. So in 1961, the former Dewdrop Inn, located on School Street, adjacent to the post office, was purchased for $5,000. The building had quite a past. According to library records, sometime after it changed hands, Mr. B. Trenholm asked the board for the right to buy the ice chest for the library that rested in the basement. It's from the past when the library was the Dewdrop Inns and Geary Morgan made crab meat sandwiches and sold them with apple pie. It's assumed that the sale was approved. So all through what we're going to be reading right now, you really get a feel for how the community, how residents and businesses got the library where it is today. Okay. So Stephanie's going to do our next reading.
Okay, let's see here. First librarian. Belva Thompson was hired as the first librarian. One of her early reports to the library board, dated April 19th, 1954, reflects life in the town over half a century ago. Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, recommends, this is the quote starts here. Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, recommends that during the summer months, the Saturday hours be changed from 2 to 5 p.m. and 7 to 8 p.m. to 1 to 5 p.m. She stated that most of the patrons in the evening were juveniles and that the earlier opening hours would enable them to borrow books before the movie theater opened. Alas, Mrs. Thompson closed her report with a resignation notice pending the summer opening of the sardine factories. She, along with many other Lubec women, depended on the wages they could earn in the packing houses. Her resignation was accepted with regret by the board.
Is it my turn or?
Stephanie, was there another?
Yeah, Fire, 1996.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're right after each other?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the program. Okay, Fire, 1966. The following appeared in the Bangor Daily News on January 4th, 1966. A fire early Thursday morning wrecked the old post office building and charred the upstairs of the Lubec Memorial Library. The Lubec Library was temporarily moved to the old Lubec Town Office, located 2 blocks from the fire scene. None of the 5,000 books was lost in the fire, but most of them sustained smoke and water damage. The books were removed from the library by Lubec High School students for storage and drying operations. Calvin Stinson, a prominent sardine manufacturer in the area, has donated the use of the building to the library. Peggy Donahue, the librarian, and Clara Giraud, am I right with that? Giraud? Spent all Friday, Saturday, and Sunday drying and arranging the books. The library will reopen in the old town office building next Monday. So from Thursday to Monday, that is such a short turnaround time.
And not only that, but former director Peggy Donahue, now known as Peggy Bailey.
Oh,
So how was it, Peggy? Were those books really soaking wet or what?
Oh, they were, and they stunk. We had to air things out and decide some things just weren't worth saving.
yeah.
So
You were-
my heart,
Didn't you tell me you were 18 at the time?
I had a gap year. So
Okay.
had a big drawer in his library.
I don't think it was big.
And I made $1.
$1 now.
So we got back and forth when we came home. Okay.
Okay, you ready for me? So, let me get out of my little cage. So what I'm gonna read brings you back to 1952. It says the Lubeck Memorial Library opened, oh, wait a minute. This is a fundraising letter. So anybody that has to write a fundraising letter, this might give you some ideas. Your Lubeck Memorial Library opened on June 21st, 1952. In these past 7 months, the library has been a busy place. Increasing numbers of people are making the use of books and materials available. We now have about 1,000 books, and now we have 22,000 books. With over 1,150 books having been borrowed and returned. About $30 has been collected in fines on overdue books. There is no charge to borrow a book, but if kept longer than the allotted 2 weeks, a fine is levied at 2 cents per day. Many persons have been our volunteer workers during library hours, and it is our aim to hope to be able to have a part-time paid librarian in charge. We also need more books, especially for young people, 3rd graders to high school. We would appreciate your membership fee of $1 or a contribution you wish to make. Addressed envelopes are enclosed for your convenience. We ask your support and membership for your library. And then the next section I have to read is from 1996, when Hilda Banks bequeathed $200,000 toward the construction of the new building. And I looked it up, I Googled it, and what's $200,000? $200,000 now would be like double that, so $400,000.
Wow.
If the Lubeck Memorial Library Association proceeds with the construction of a new library facility, I respectfully request that the following be incorporated therein. And this is what Hilda had asked for. A classics section. Every effort must be made to keep alive the interest and love of literature of the past, particularly of American and English authors. Old favorites have been eased off the shelves because of space needs, and I wish that not only shelf space, but purchase of old favorites be allowed so that the current sections will not overwhelm the book budget to the exclusion of the old classics. It's a really long sentence. The provision for space and books of this type must be made from the beginning of the building plan and budget so that on opening day, the reading public may recognize at once that their new library has a reverence for the old as well as appreciation for the new. So,
So, we wanted to kind of fill in the gaps of the time between the library was founded and the time that efforts began being made for the new building. And now I'd like for Suzanne to talk about that. With 8 of her friends, Gretchen and Peggy, who were very instrumental in everything that went on, all facets of the new building.
Right.
And in addition, we have some other folks here, maybe you can point them out too.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, I think just because there were 2 things that, one other thing about Hilda's will was that she left the money. We had to build a new library within 4 years, or it went elsewhere. It had to be a new building, not an addition. I mean, these were brilliant restrictions to put in there. It couldn't sit forever. They weren't going to just add on to this strange old building where you had little corridors here and there. And she wanted a kitchenette of sorts at the library somewhere so the friends of the library could have their meetings, which is why we have all the fancy tea drawers. and somewhat classic architecture keeping of the town, which was one of the decisions on the trim on the windows and things, even though it was, so that's just an aside. I don't know where you want to start.
So if it hadn't been for Hilda's donation, that was the impetus for.
Right,
the new
Hilda's
building.
donation, we had a small, very small budget at that point, and the idea of, we had already, at the point that we received that, we'd already put one addition onto the building. If you've been out to the Grange and seen what was the art building next door, the gallery, the back section was an addition, and Rick Harner was president of the board at that point. And worked on that project. And that was another example of sort of, a lot of the ability of the library was volunteer help and community support and people lending talents. When Rick was close to Sheldon Stanley, and Sheldon dug the foundation hole, but he basically lent Rick the forms, instead of charging him to put the forms up for the poor. Rick and some other volunteers put the forms up and helped with the poor. And there were just all kinds of little things like that over time, of people doing things.
And Suzanne, I don't know how many, maybe you already, all of you realize this, but the original building had to be actually moved. And there were some photographs of it over here. So the whole building, that office building that's next to the Grange, that was the original library, plus the addition. There's a photo there of it being hauled up School Street. So just keep in mind, just arranging all of that. Not only the anxiety that must have been
I
involved.
think we sold it to him for $1.
But it was Alan Denise Rummel who bought the building. And I said, well, that's a shame to tear that down. We'll buy it and we'll move it.
Yeah.
And it got hairy because electrical lines had to come down, and he said, well, it was a little bigger project than we anticipated. But that old library building is on that corner by the Grange Hall.
And they also allowed us to use the Grange for a temporary library while construction was happening.
Right. And that was a good, at least a year. Longer.
Yeah, it was just about, it was a little over a year, I think.
Yeah.
And we managed all kinds, students at school, all kinds of people. I spent time ahead of time boxing up the books, weeding heavily, because there wasn't going to be space. There was those long tables for anyone who's been in the Grange. You couldn't move. The bookshelves in the old library were nailed to the wall, built on the walls. And B, there was no place to put many shelves because the tables couldn't go.
What's one used for now?
So the books were displayed and, spine up on the tables. But I got the books boxed up, all labeled, A to this part of it, all lined up. And then all kinds of people helped. I think it only took us, I don't know who else was still here then, whether it was more than a day of actually, I think we moved the books out in about a day, and we were closed for a week between reopening at the Grange, and they let us use the Grange. So we operated there for a year, and then the same process happened when it was time to move back in.
Was it high school kids again?
It was high school.
Everybody.
It was everybody. There were
It was all
I
kinds.
can't remember. I don't have I don't know if it was specific, clubs or groups, or if it was just the word spread. But I know it was high school kids.
I had a Girl Scout troop then, and I brought them in. But we were just one of a zillion people running
There were
around.
people from
Yeah.
the community, because I remember coming in with Emily.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, that's right.
it was probably pre-Facebook.
Oh, definitely.
The word got out somehow that we were looking for anybody who could help. And I have a minor detail, just a little tiny side story. The new dots on the new books to shelve them that started because one of the first volunteers I had was Rio Rudolph, Alan Rudolph's first wife, who died. She was a wonderful woman. But she would come in and help shelve the books, and she came in often enough. She knew which were the new books and went up front. But Alan would come to help, and he didn't have a clue. So we started putting bright red dots on ones to go up front, and we're still doing it. Somebody have a question?
I just wanted you to, since we're talking about all that period there, I would love you to tell the story of how you came by the shelves for the old building, because we didn't mention that.
For the extension,
Yes,
right?
for the extension.
For the addition. Yeah.
I was wondering if anyone has any knowledge about the old building that moved up to the Grange, about that building possibly being haunted.
Oh, I don't. The little one.
The one that was here and got moved up.
That was the library. I never heard anything about a haunting. Sorry.
Okay, nobody.
No, never had any ghostly apparitions while I was there.
They all left in the fishing.
What did you hear, Jim?
Well, it's not what I heard, it's what we experienced up there one day.
Oh. In the building.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, we were up at the art gallery, which was, there was an upstairs,
Yep.
and there was a sign not to go up there. And it was just my wife and I downstairs looking at the artwork, and the artist who owned the place was also in there. And we distinctly, all three of us, heard someone walking around upstairs. And she came out to see why we'd gone upstairs when there's a sign that says, "Don't go upstairs." So I told her, well, we weren't up there. And she got her husband to go up and look around, and there was nobody there, but she was quite rattled, and it was just really strange.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't know about that while I was
Well, maybe they took residence after we moved the building.
But maybe it was a ghost on the site that didn't have a house and now they have a house. The other thing that was interesting was if you're familiar with the little children's table, you've seen the table in the children's room? Before we put the addition on, that was the only place where there was enough room to put chairs around a table. We had all our board meetings there.
On the tiny chairs.
On the tiny chairs.
I've seen you guys have meetings here.
We do, but we had,
You're
there were
still
some
doing that.
very large board members. Tall, and that's the only place we had. There was no place in the front room. There was one small picture book shelving, that table, and the desk. So somebody can speak to who was part of it, but for a while there was a story time that happened, but I was in the other room at the desk, and so the moms, were you there, Stephanie? Yeah. The moms did it themselves. Melissa,
We're in the back room.
right, Melissa was gonna come and say how that saved her life. How it was just so important to be able to get out with the kids and be with other kids and moms.
Yeah.
So that building was really tiny, and so they raised funds for that addition to the
Right.
building, that long piece that you see, if you look at the photographs over there. And so when they did that, was that when the incident with the shelves occurred?
Yes, okay, we're back to the shelves. We like that story. So Rick's son was around 8 at the time, and they were driving somewhere on the Main State Turnpike up from Portland this way, driving along. And he knows we've got the building's under construction, but we're gonna need shelving. And he looks over and there's a pickup truck full of knocked down library shelving. So he starts doing this stuff and getting Franz to do this stuff and honking. And the woman pulls over. He said, if I didn't have a little child, I think she would have just kept going. And he just wanted to know where she got it, if there's any more. And she said, it was all smoke damage and I don't know where it came from. I can't remember that. But she said, I got it, and after I paid for it and remeasured it, I realized it's 2 inches too tall for the room I'm putting it in. And he said, can we buy it? Can we pay you what you paid for it? So he and Bob Timemouth, and that's it was an elderly British couple who'd settled here. And I'm going to do another aside in between just to say that the individual who was librarian before me smoked a lot. And they came in after I'd taken over for a little while, and they were going, Bob, think we need to paint the building. They were in their 70s or 80s. So Rick would move the shelves off and they repainted the entire interior of the library as volunteers during the course of that year. But, so he and Rick, who both had some woodworking skills, cleaned up and refinished all of that shelving. And that's what's now on one wall in the children's room and in the back corner in the other room. We're still using it. There were two serendipities while we were out at the Grange. So we were out at the Grange, and there were 2 times when I was there just trying to catch up, when I wasn't supposed to be there, and answered the phone. And one was someone who was on the board at the whatever the big bank and credit card thing in Camden was. And yeah, and each one of them got a turn to give a donation. She read the article. We were building a new library, and because I answered the phone on the right day before she went to the next person on the list, we got $5,000 to buy new books for the new library. And then there was someone else who stopped in because they had a family foundation. They were just interested. It was another time I was there without being supposed to be there, and showed them around, and they were like, well, what, is there something our foundation could do? What do you need? And I explained how what we really needed was a really nice circulation desk. We had this little old metal desk. And I said, even just the money to buy really good hardware for it would be a step forward. And they gave us the money to pay for most of the circulation desk.
Very good. What about the guy who you were so nice to that left us the money that helped build this room?
Oh, there was an individual who wanted his brother, he and his brother always came up in the summer. They were both single people who worked in boarding schools, either teaching or later on administratively. And he wanted to have donations in memory of his brother. And the first conversation we had, he was screaming at me. You couldn't hear the conversation. You couldn't hear anything. It was a bad cell reception. And I'm trying to say, I can't hear you. So we didn't start off really well. And he had a lot of stipulations, but I was cool with it all. So it worked out. We got along. I went to when he was buried up here, and the folks at the Peak, Sue and Dennis, he always stayed at the Peacock House. So Sue and Dennis and I went to the funeral. But when he died, he left us, someone remember, the clock that we have out there it was everything he owned in his apartment. Instead of getting rid of it, he left it to someone. We had boxes of unopened VHS tapes from a million years ago.
Oh, gee.
Does anyone remember all this stuff?
I do.
Yeah, it was amazing. Harry Snyder fixed the clock. I said, we've got this clock. This doesn't work. He said, I got my whole house full of clocks that I can fix. I said, could you fix this one? And he did. Yeah. Anyway, when he finally died, he left his annuity to us. So it's community. It's coincidence. It's I don't know.
We've had several very large requests.
Yeah.
I was thinking in particular of Carol Lumber,
Right.
but many really. It's been
Is anybody going to mention Rogers Island?
Oh yes, yes. I got into that. That's a longer story. We got to give time for you and Joe. Yes, there's been a number of the Clara Giroux. The first before I got involved with the library working here, Noni McBride conned me into being treasurer for a little while. Jennifer was a baby at the time. And when Jennifer got crawling around and got into the one drawer that we had, we were living in this little house with open shelving, and got a hold of the town check for the library for the year. I resigned. I said, I can't do this. Sorry, Mom. That's all right. It's good to get out of the job. But at that point, we had no ongoing money. And then Clara Giroux had left a bequest, which I can't remember what it generated, but it generated enough. We used that to buy books. And it was a little while later. Up till then, the only books we bought was what the Friends of the Library raised, or the reason I was showing Sumner Pike's picture around was that Peggy had said that he was a primary source of books. He read a lot of nonfiction, and he'd read a book and he'd mail it to the library. Right?
Well, I think they could have a book, bring it down.
Bring a whatever.
In town, he wasn't,
Oh, okay,
didn't worry about man.
okay. But he donated a lot of books.
And for fund drives, he would match dollar for dollar them.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. That's good. And do you have any other memories of the early funding?
Just, I think they just fund drive letters, you know,
Right.
and that it was, what was raised was very small,
Yeah.
you know.
And
Yeah.
And for a long time, there's a memorial book out there, and memorial bequests were used for books. Is that correct?
My folks were involved years before I was, and their big thing was setting up an endowment fund. And that's a lot of what the memorial donations went for.
Okay.
Just try to make sure the library would continue.
Mm-hmm.
Worry about the day-to-day stuff, day-to-day, but they wanted to plan.
Oh, good.
So
Yeah.
Peggy, how did the book work? I've been seeing that book for years and I've never really understood exactly.
People donated in memory of their loved ones.
So that,
And
and
it was
then
written in
their
the book.
name was
They-
included.
Nina Baldwin would bring a lot of new books.
And now what we haven't kept up with the memorial book itself, because now in general, when people donate money to someone, we also put up a plaque. So the plaques are up there. And I've lost the thread of where we were going next.
I think that you wanted to say something about Roger.
Oh, right, okay, so we had Hilda's will, and then Joe Cox, who many of you don't know, and Gretchen researched, and I don't know how you found out about the Dickerson money
I had heard
initially.
rumors about it for years,
Okay,
but the town didn't want it. They didn't want it messy. This woman in North Quebec, I can't remember her name.
right, June Dickerson.
Okay, committed suicide, and she left a large amount of money to do a bird sanctuary, so they bought Rogers Island off North Quebec Road. And the will said, if the birds are happy, the money can be used for cultural purposes.
And it went on to describe what basically was an artist colony for people of all interests and needs, and they're gonna have good housing and comfortable beds and good food and a wonderful life, I mean, it was, anyway.
So anyway, the board said, let's try and get it, and we went to town
Right.
meeting. No one voted against it, but then we had to break the will and probate. And the judge gave us, I think I remember about 200,000.
I think we only asked for 150,000. We said we'd leave 50,000 for the birds. Or maybe that's what the judge decided.
The judge did want to keep a little money. So that made up the rest.
Yeah, and which was huge. And it was because the two of them looked into this and pursued it. It had been sitting at the town office accruing interest.
It's still sitting up there getting interest.
Well, but the bulk of it, the reason it was that much money was it had been sitting since she died because no one could figure out what to do with it except let it sit there. Anyway, that was and if you hadn't come up with that, no one, and Gretchen kindly first went to see if Summer Keys would like to try and get it. They were like, I don't
And
know.
I thought again.
No, thank you. Bruce said, we don't want to deal with the politics of the town.
I think she'd be very happy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a public library is as close as you.
I think she would have been pleased.
But are the birds happy?
And the library went out, volunteers and members of the staff from board and everything went out and did a big trash cleanup on Rogers Island.
And we asked the birds.
Are you happy?
Crows on the hill.
Okay.
I had a question that I vaguely remember some story about Gretchen driving up to Bangor. What did that have to do with? What was that all
Gretchen has
about?
no memory.
No,
of that.
this had to do with, we didn't have, Peter Robinson was the one that was gonna build the building, and everyone, we didn't feel we needed architectural drawings that went down to where every outlet and everything went, because he knew what he was doing, everyone was impressed with his work. We had Steve Lehman, who I'm sorry isn't here tonight. I have to back up for a minute after Hilda's will was read, but let me tell you this part. So Steve Lehman had another friend who had one of those AutoCAD type programs. So he went and worked with him and they got the rough plans into something more formal. But it wasn't good enough to pass the state fire inspector's requirements.
Which we only remembered at the last
We only
minute.
found out, and Gretchen found some architectural engineer who could do this
I begged.
and drove up to Orono or
Yeah.
Bangor someplace
Yeah.
to get this man to,
Give us the okay.
you know, it's
For
just.
the man next door, Bill, yeah,
Mhm.
when he did it, I said, well, who did you go to? I didn't ask anybody. I just built it. And I thought, we can't do that.
Wow. Yeah. What was the aside I said I was gonna go back to?
Oh, well.
Oh, Hilda's will. Okay, so we get the notification that we're mentioned in her will. We don't know how much money we're talking about. The alternative benefactor is her nephew. No one can get, they call the number, they write, the man will not speak to anyone. We can't get any information. It costs us $10,000 in legal fees to first find out what the amount was, and secondarily get him to actually release the money. But we did it. And then some people remember that on the opening day, he and his wife arrived from where it was they lived, expecting to be treated like royalty. And they had a cold shoulder. Nothing really, really mean, but what? So what?
It's even things like the floor in the old library, Steve Lehman and Diana Wilson, on their hands and knees, laid all that
Right.
tile and grouted it.
Right, and I think they paid themselves like minimum wage or something for it. And Diana negotiated, she went in and negotiated with Hammond Lumber to get the specific tiles that she thought would be good at a reasonable price in bulk. And everything that both Peter and they did was, absolutely square and true and wonderful. And there is a slightly funny story about the lock. We wanted a lock bookcase for the genealogy, but we didn't have one. And there was a gentleman in Whiting, John Dolan, who used the library a lot. And he'd always been trying to write a book. And he was a good library user. And when he died, his son wrote and said he wanted to do something in memory of his dad. And I told him how we wanted to have the genealogy cabinet. He thought that was a great idea. So I'll tell you what he asked to have put on the side.
There are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. Somerset Maugham.
So just all these little touches of what individuals did for us.
We really realized when this part, the new edition was being added, what a sterling job was done with the old Whiting building.
Right.
There were some, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but there were a lot of things that weren't proper, especially when we compared them to what we had here. So they were corrected eventually, but it took some doing. But having this as an example of a fine building really helped us to make sure certain that they did what they were supposed to be doing in this edition.
And the other thing there were some really good decisions made. One was when we were talking about flooring and decided that, it was carpet or tile. Well, well, let me bring out one, this, oh, it's over here. Pass this around. So the individual who was the building committee, it's like, we seem to always have one person who's the building, was Dick Bisbee. And he had worked for Disney, working with mock-ups and plans for displays. So we had a rough layout, and he did this 3D model, and I don't remember, somebody may, but when we saw it in 3D, there was something about it that we looked at and went, that is not going to work. And changed it before we actually built. And why did I bring that up? Was there a segue?
Quality of building. You were looking at rugs.
Oh, the rights, okay. Well, so we decided that we couldn't predict what libraries were gonna be doing. When we moved in here, it was all books still. We had our first computer on 9/11. They were here installing it on 9/11. And we chose the tile and, because you could move things around, you weren't gonna have marks in the, it may be that 20 years from now, there'll be hardly any books on the shelves. I don't know what it'll do. Well, no, I just, I don't know. We may have fewer. And the other decision we made was that we were really fortunate with was that looking into shelving, having Steve build nice hardwood shelving locally was about the same cost as buying metal rickety library shelving and having it shipped. And also, it's so movable. But we were very conscious of the fact that we didn't know what the future was. And even the division between the children's room and the other, a lot of the division, we've got a few walls, but a lot of it's flexible. So that in the future, people can have some free leeway. I don't know who else, did you?
I think that the children's room is the best part of it.
Well, and that was, I don't think one of them was the Bregman Trust, but when we moved in here, we had the minimal shelving. We figured out just how much shelving we had to have to get some books on, and then we've had more built over time as we got it. And the carpeted steps in the kids' room, that was intended, but we didn't have the money to do it at first. I think that one was a Redmond grant. There was this fund that, and then we still get it, but at that point it was administered by the Bar Harbor Bank in Bangor or somebody. And it was a family trust, and it was for small public rural libraries. And sort of every year, it was the nicest one-page application. It hardly wanted anything.
The kitchen didn't go in right away either.
Right, the kitchen didn't go in right away either. Anyway, it was just, I feel like there's been a lot of serendipity and a lot of what we have now is because of the talents and skill sets and generosity of individuals, or the vision of individuals who came up with, did you ever think about this one?
Yes, and people just coming in, even during the summer, a lot of times during the summer, they're just passing through town. And they say things like, I can't believe you have such a wonderful library for such a small town. You must be very well supported by your town government. Not always from all the conversation.
But my comment on that one is, they've never given us more than $4,000. And if it's gonna be limited, it's great that it's so limited, because it's so obvious that that's not gonna do it.
And they can't say too much about what
They
we
can't
do
say
or
anything
they're
about
not-
what we're doing,
Right.
because they're not,
That's
There's
the
been more on fireworks.
right, that if somebody comes in and asks for
Right.
something, we don't have to go to another authority. The general thing, even if we think it's completely bonkers, is to say, I don't know, we never thought about that. We'll talk about it at our next staff meeting and see if we think there's a way we can make that work.
One thing I really appreciate about this library is how accessible it is. Did you, right from the beginning, when you built this building, have it be accessible to people that couldn't do stairs
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff like that?
I say it's a library built by love.
Was it, we're very lucky to have the technical support that we had.
And the librarians.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're very lucky to have other staff who've kept up with the technology. And that's the other story I wanted, why I wanted Susan and Steve here.
I would like to say something about the technical part that we dealt with.
Yeah.
When we moved here, well, we did go a couple times into the old building that was up here. We didn't go into the Grange, that was we weren't there. But we came here, we moved here permanently, just about when the library opened, a little bit after maybe. And the circulation desk, as you see it now, part of it was already installed and it was beautiful. But the computers we had were all donated. And they were on those 4-foot by 8-foot tables, sagging, card tables and all, there were 4 of them. The one that was closest to the circulation desk, when you turned it on, this big screen came up and it said, Octoon! And it's like, I don't know where that thing came from. But Octoon and the 3 that
I don't remember it.
oh, that always gave me a jolt. Turn that thing on and I'm thinking, what are they watching? So we had 4 donated computers. A couple of them were like 10 years old. And I happened upon the LL Bean Foundation donation. I don't remember how that happened. And I put in for 6 computers. I could have put in for 8 or 10, but I thought I was being kind of a hog, so 6. So we had a new one at the circulation desk, and then we had the other ones out there. So you've got these new computers. What are you going to do with them? Put them on the saggy tables? So we had a little committee work with Steve Lehman. We had this very complicated thing along that wall. It was going to come out. It was going to do all these things. And finally, it was like, just make it one big long shelf. So we made this big long shelf that was not really partitioned, so you could get a whole bunch more computers, or you could put up screens or whatever. And we painted the wall. That was another project, trying to find what kind of paint had been used in here, because there was no record of it anywhere. Eric didn't know, so we're running around trying to match the paint. And then bulletin boards on there, which were just to be for computer information. And then Stephen had to try to keep all the viruses and all the goodies off those computers. And we spent, I think, weeks going through every computer with some kind of thing that he figured out to get rid of the crap. When the librarian shut the machine off at the end of the day, all that stuff went away and we got back to the basic nervous system of the computer.
This is why I wanted the 2 of you, or I've been nagging trying to get you to come, because these people, not only did they have the technology to figure it out, they crawled around in the attic and
Yes, we
did the wiring for the
Well, that, and Eddie, what's Eddie's name?
Ryer.
Eddie Ryer and us, we were upstairs crawling around, and then later we got the Wi-Fi connected, and I don't know, it involved some guy over, I think, in Campbell, and then we got the fiber installed. But I want to go back for a moment to getting the phones going here. If you remember, we had to have a couple of board meetings promising whoever it was, powers that be, that our computers would adhere to the SIPA rule, Child
Child
Information
Internet
Protection.
Protection.
Oh my word, I'll never forget the paperwork. It was awful. It was awful. And then we got some kind of, I think you had to keep track of the phone bill so we could get a discount on the library phones here.
Okay.
Um,
I don't, yeah, I believe you. I don't remember.
all that kind of stuff. And then there was one more anomaly, and I don't remember the whole thing and why it happened. Betsy Ross started putting in some landscaping in the back, and I felt like they were impinging on library property.
They did.
That's what was going
They
on.
did.
So I don't remember why or how, but I went to the safety deposit box for the library and I got the deed out because the man over there was yelling at me, well, look at the deed, look at the deed, look at the deed.
Okay.
I got the deed out and I was reading it and it's like, what the hell is this? And I read it and I read it. And then I don't remember who I talked to about it. I said, read the first paragraph. The library owned not only this property, but the property that the Betsy Ross building was on in that first paragraph. So I had to find the lawyer. Okay, the lawyer who got this thing working. She was downstate. She moved out of Quebec already. So I got in touch with her. She was embarrassed to hell. And I said, would you please rewrite the thing so that the library only owns the library property and he owns his stuff, and you get in touch with him because I don't want to talk to him anymore. He was threatening to sue me personally for aggravation or whatever it was. And I called Noni McBride. I was crying my heart out. This is Thanksgiving. And here I am. I'm like, oh Lord, this man's he's gonna sue us for everything. And all I want to do is get the library to own what it owns. So we got the surveyor up here.
Right. That part I remember. I didn't remember all that drama behind
He
it.
had a heart attack, and his wife didn't want him to come here. But we waited, and finally he came, and we were trying to find points across the street as to how our property here had been marked out. So that's that's enough stories. I mean, I've got a whole bucket of them.
Well, that's, I just think that part of what this library has benefited from is the right skill sets and the right energies and the right commitments from generous people at the right time.
And Suzanne learned a lot from Stephen. I remember these talks about this, that, and the other. The two
I
of them.
started with zero information, so it didn't take much to learn a lot.
There are a lot of detail things that most of the public probably is certainly not aware of. I've always been really impressed by the way Suzanne goes about ordering books and how she squeezes the most books out of every penny that we get. And that, I'm not kidding. She will look 3 or 4 different places until she finds the best price, the best discount.
Yeah.
And it's over the years, it's made an incredible difference in our book collection. We have a very fine book collection. Everyone really comments
I
on
also
that.
want to give a shout out to the State Library, which negotiates a contract, and it's been with Baker and Taylor for the last number of years. And I think on average, it comes up to about a 40% discount off of list price. If it's a small press thing, it's different. If it's but it's a huge difference. I mean, I think I placed a $600 order and it was just over, it was not that much over 300 because of the particular, they were all things that got a really good discount. New mass market trade gets a really good discount. So the state does a lot of things for us that we don't, we don't pay separately for. It's just part of what the state library does.
Not interlibrary loan.
Oh, yeah. Years ago, when I first started here, you had to mail every interlibrary loan back, because there was no other way to get them. They'd mail them from Bangor and we'd mail them back. So people that really used a lot of interlibrary loan, we asked if they would consider chipping in on the cost of mailing them back. And now and at one point, I don't know how much the book budget was. It must have been around 2,000 but I just committed 800 of what we had for book budget to be part of the free interlibrary loan so that we could get any book we wanted for people. rather than. And then about 2 years later or a year later, they said that everyone that was, for whom it was important enough that they were already paying would get a free day. So,
Which means 1 day a week.
yeah, one delivery a week, which is,
Yeah.
we're in a little bit of transition with a different company now, but, yeah, it's, it's really, maybe it doesn't come fast, but if you can get the book.
Makes our book club possible.
Anyway, that was a whole aside off of, but and I'm so glad Susan and Steve came, but there's been other key people over the time that, whether it was, there's always been somebody who saved our life. At the moment, it's
That's the
Wayne.
thing, there's always been somebody.
Somebody saved our, Wayne went out and just fixed the whole, the poetry post history is that Jennifer, during grad school, was doing a presentation out in Portland, Oregon, where her brother lived. And she had a 2-year-old, was Lauren 2 then?
Who can remember?
Anyway, she was little. So Walter flew out to babysit, and they walked around the neighborhood where her brother was renting. And they saw these poetry posts. This neighborhood had a lot of just pick out your free poem. So he came back and built one, gave it to the library. And then Wayne saw that it was not in good physical shape after all those years, and he fixed it all up. I mean, and then
Didn't he
Jennifer
have to
took
dig it
over putting poems in it.
Didn't he have to dig it out and move it or something?
Oh, right,
It was
right.
like set in concrete.
He said, yeah, you tell that story.
Yes, he had to dig it out, and it was really hard to get out. And at one point, I was here with him, and we were pulling on it, and he said, "I think Walter wants to keep it."
Jennifer said to me, she said he thought Walter was down there hanging out.
Then there are all the mosaics. Before we end, would you say something about Naomi?
Oh, yes.
I think we have a library because my Aunt Noni had the library when she was growing up in Cape.
Oh, really?
And she wanted a library when she came to Lubec. So she was persistent. And if anybody knew my Aunt Noni,
Yes.
she was persistent.
Yeah.
So,
Very
and-
stubborn.
And
And the
Yeah.
Robert's Rules of Order at the meetings.
well, she was on the library board for
For 50
50
years.
years, for a long time, and she was our parliamentarian.
Yeah.
So we went by the bylaws, we went by Robert's Rules of Order, and she kept us in line, and
Can you show people the picture of her?
I will. The other thing I wanted to say, that Peggy was on the board when we did this edition. One of the smart things they did was, if I have this right, we didn't spend every penny on the building, and they set aside $100,000 for 10 years to just accrue interest. So we're just,
Which edition are we talking about, Suzanne?
the first,
The first edition to when the cottage.
no, we're talking about when we built the new library, not the addition.
Okay.
I can't talk and walk and things.
Oh, it's fine.
But they decided that, it was for endowment, it was for long-term stuff, but they were setting some aside just to grow.
then because in 10 years, we didn't know what we needed.
Right. And it was fabulous.
Mom,
Yeah.
is it true that when you became the librarian, the Dewey Decimal System was not being used? and you
No,
instituted
it was
that?
when I was becoming librarian, that was the thing that Paula had accomplished during her time, was she had got most of it into Dewey Decimal. When I think I said when I started, we just had to send off postcards, and then once we had a system, once we had whatever the system was that was on disk that had the catalog numbers at other libraries for things, where you could see what was out there, you still might have to mail a postcard, but you know what you were looking for.
And then she put it all on a computer.
That helped correct some of the things that weren't working.
You mean, sorry, Gretchen, for the computer checkout system, every book had to be logged in. Isn't that you and
Yeah.
Mary?
Mary and Ginny Morano.
Right.
the three of us.
Right.
So Ginny had the tech and I had the library and Mary had the energy.
That's right, forgot that whole step.
Yeah.
It was huge.
One thing that I always enjoyed when I started working here was, we still had the old cards. So when people would check out a book years ago, they would write their name. So you could look at the book and you could see who it had checked it out. And you recognize all the names. They, later on, I guess for privacy, they started using numbers. But,
Well, I'm sorry, but I really missed that because I can't remember what I've read. And I used to pull the card and go, oh, I read that there in 1997. Okay, I need to check it out.
yeah, there was a real transition period there. So people started coming up with these very inventive ways of making sure that they make their own personal mark someplace unobtrusive in the book so that they know that whether or not they've read it before.
I never thought of that.
They have bays. Suzanne, one thing that people do talk about, I remember Melissa talking about it, and Stephanie, was the group of mothers that would come in, and it would be like a regular event.
Weekly.
And that always struck me that it was a real meeting place, and that the children could play. It was like a play day, I guess, also. But I don't know if it was Melissa or somebody said that they really looked forward to those times. And I've noticed that with you, with the children all along, and it's just a wonderful thing.
I mean, it started when we started in this building. Jennifer did a pajama story time,
That's right. Yeah.
which the CV kids were, they're grown up now. They were little kids.
Yeah.
They got their own kids, so they were little kids.
David Gale was president of the board at that time, and he actually came to the pajama story time in pajamas.
Yeah, it feels like for years it was sort of an organized story time that started at a certain time. I had a routine. We did now it's kind of a drop in, drop out. But I feel like now it's more. Sometimes it's reading to them. I'm always trying to get kids to meet Mr. Putter and Tabby and different characters, but it's just having them be happy to be here. I mean, sometimes we only read a few stories, but they take home piles of books when they leave. As long as it's a friendly place that they want to be.
Well, I have to say, as someone who I raised my daughter here, and she's 27 now, how many warm public places are there in Washington County where you can go with a child? And it's like, I have to get out of the house. So it wasn't just story time, but it was also being able to just come and read and look at the books. And I went to some library board meeting, it was about 10 years ago, and I just wanted to thank the library for providing the service. And I didn't expect it, but I burst into tears. It's like, I'm so grateful we have it. It was really important.
Well, and talk about how you, like during COVID, you guys did not just lock up the doors, right? You were taking email requests and boxing things up for people.
And we were also book house.
Yeah.
People would come and park outside, and we would take the books out to them, and we were thinking about getting some roller skates.
And we also, I remember we had a staff meeting on a Friday, and by Sunday we were on the phone with each other saying we obviously have to close or do what other libraries are doing. So any of us that had any connections to anybody, we sent out the word that
Right.
come in Monday and take, you can take 10 books, you can take 100 books, just get what we have no idea when we'll open again, but you can come get a good load up Monday and I can't remember, but I think there were like 400
We
books. went out
circulated
there.
over 500
That's
books.
right.
Nobody had any idea how many books they were gonna need.
No. Nobody had any idea how long it was gonna go.
And we left that day, when people had checked the books out at the end of the day, and the last person was leaving. he said, oh, well, probably, this is probably only gonna last a couple of weeks.
Wishful thinking.
Yes. But there were, but we were very inventive in the way we reopened gradually. And I really have to hand it to our patrons, to the people who, because we didn't, people did not complain. They were just so pleased to be able to get a book. They didn't care if they couldn't come in and walk around and spend time. Just very patient. And I know there were some very difficult, challenging things that were going on in other areas, but our people were very understanding.
But it's a library you can walk in and you can say, I don't remember the title or the author, but the cover is purple. And I think it started with a D, and she'll find it.
And they had a black dog in there, a little more. I think, Jennifer, didn't you make a display one time of all read books?
Yes, I did. Yes, we had it by the board.
When someone had said, I can't remember anything about it
Look how
except
pretty the
the
bridge
cover.
is.
That's right.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to thank everyone who had anything to do with nurturing the library through the years. I want to give you a big hand.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of the things that, programs and things we've had that people have really benefited from have come from patrons. Either knowing someone had a skill. I mean, just the fact that when people say, how can you have such a good, for a small town? I've even had people say, part of why we picked this town to move to was we thought it must be a good community if they created this much of a library in this small a town. When
We live in a unique place.
Yeah, when
We know that.
when Madeline and Lucky when we opened, they donated the braided rug they made in the kids' room. And Gwen gave us we had the piano because because someone said, I just found the piano I wanted all my life, and would you like this one? And we were like, this was before the edition. It's like, I don't know where we're going to put it, but we'll give it a try.
And then we had a gentleman who came in on a regular basis, who had a summer home in Campobello, and offered to tune it for us.
Right, for years he was tuning it.
And he brought us this little thermometer to tell what the humidity was, so that he would know exactly what to do. It's seen a lot. It's seen a lot of wear, but it does the job. When we had our opening for the edition, we had Jane Weintraub was playing, and I told her, well, one of the pedals sticks a little bit, and it might not be tuned very well. And she says, no problem. I have a lot of music that would fit right into that. Anyway, we have refreshments, by the way. If you all would like to have, we have some refreshments out in the lobby there, and what we were hoping was maybe we could all have a conversation and have some refreshments, and maybe make Suzanne talk some more.
All right. Make somebody else talk more. I'm sure other people have stories. Right?